Ladies and gentlemen,
Please welcome.
I like this kind of party, baby.
It's good to be the king.
Mike Damergis along with the King, Scott Engel with the King and I podcast, week number 8. And Scott, it's great to be back again with you.
Yeah, great to be back with you. For those who are tuning in for the first time, Mike was my original producer on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. He christened me the King of Fantasy Sports. And you could also find me also on thegameday.com, rotoballer.com for my lineup rankings, and Seahawks.com on the Fantasy Insider tab.
And you can follow me at Sports Radio Prof on Twitter, which is now X, or mad-sports.com. What do you say we get started, Scott?
Why do you have mad? Like,
it's my initials, Michael Andrew Damergis.
I thought there was a temperamental anger management issue.
Me? Come on now.
Mad, the mad professor.
Or the Mad Hatter, right? The old Batman Batman sitcom
like
back in the 1960s.
The nutty professor, sort of.
A little,
Hercules.
a little bit of both.
I always thought when I was a Seahawk fan, whenever Richard Sherman got an interception, they should have played the nutty professor on the jumbotron. And Sherman.
Yeah, they never related that, did they?
No,
I don't think he would have liked it.
It's only something in my niche mind that I came up with. Maybe he wouldn't have liked it, but I'm a big Richard Sherman fan.
Let's get started. First, the Bengals taking on the 49ers in San Francisco. The Bengals getting 4 points, over and under 43.5 at the time of this recording. I got to tell you, Scott, I think the 49ers are in trouble. I don't think we are who we thought they were. Great teams don't lose 2 games in a row. Well,
the NFL, good teams can, drop a game or two, but, the 49ers starting to show signs of slippage here. And, now they have a quarterback issue going into this week as the greatest quarterback in the last, 2-3 decades for the Jets. Sam Darnold is probably going to start for them this week.
He can have him. Take him. Find out what he's really about. And they've got injuries in San Francisco, too. Not just Purdy, but Debo and Trent Williams as well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the Purdy critics have said that anybody can quarterback this team because it's so quarterback friendly. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but we'll find out what Darnold has here. And I have him ranked as a top 15 fantasy quarterback. His next to last game with the Panthers, he passed for well over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And this is going to be the friendliest offensive environment that he's ever played in. George Kittle, I think I'll lean on him a lot. You don't bench George Kittle. He has 7 touchdown receptions in his last 5 home games. I think I'll lean on Brandon Ayuk a lot, who I still have ranked as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver this week on rotoballer.com, playing like a wide receiver 1 this week. You wonder what kind of chemistry they have together. In DFS, maybe Jawan Jennings, because sometimes backup quarterbacks play good with backup receivers who are pressed into larger roles. I'm fading the 49ers defense here because Joe Burrow is getting healthier, but you don't know which way they're going to go with Darnold. Is the defense going to spend more time on the field? Not worry about the 49ers matchup for Joe Burrow. He's top 10 for me fantasy-wise this week. Hopefully T. Higgins has a better performance because the 49ers can be had on the back end of the defense. Joe Mixon's been disappointing, not an ideal start. You don't bench Jamar Chase against anybody. The spread on this game was originally 5.5, Mike, but I think it's moved since.
San Francisco, the first 5 games, scored 30 or more points in each of those games, 17 the last 2 games. And I got to tell you, what I saw in Minnesota, they pushed them around a little bit. And that was without Jefferson in the lineup.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kirk Cousins continues to be a really good fantasy quarterback, even without Justin Jefferson. And, for the Vikings to give him a game like that, okay, Cleveland has a really good defense. And it wasn't a shock that they were able to shut them down for the last week. But the problem is when Purdy started playing from behind, he just didn't play as well, Mike. And
he's not Joe Montana like they thought he was, right?
No, I've heard those comparisons. I'm like, okay, slow your roll here. Right now, The Bengals are +4, -110, and +164 on the money line. Those are not bad wagers, Mike.
All right, moving along here. Let's talk about the Vikings. They are taking on the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field there. Minnesota, -1.5. Jordan Love not leading up to expectations. And I guess you could say a star is born in Minnesota with Jordan Addison.
Yeah, with Jefferson out, he's really stepped forward. Came back from an injury. I think he's a must start as a fantasy wide receiver 2 or 3 this week. The Packers are not good against the run. They rank 30th in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs. So I think you can roll with Alexander Madison 1 week, but keep an eye on Cam Akers because it looks like he might soon at least gain a full-time share of that job, or he might ultimately surpass Madison as the lead back there, the former Ram. So that's a situation to watch, but both guys could be pretty good flex plays for this week. You talked about Addison, KJ Osborne, not somebody I ideally want to use, better real life player, solid real life player, not much of a fantasy player. Cousins, like I said, still playing like a top 8 fantasy quarterback despite losing Jefferson, like you pointed out. This might be a better matchup for Jordan Love. I like Romeo Doubs this week. In his last 2 home games, he has 5+ catches and 70+ receiving yards. I like him against his secondary. We don't make of the backfield how healthy Aaron Jones is. Christian Watson keeps getting hurt, but it's a good matchup. There are some fantasy plays in this game, Mike, and this is a game where you're kind of looking at the spread. It's a tough divisional game, -1.5, but this is a game that Green Bay needs, and the Packers, it's a winnable game for them if they play respectably. It's kind of interesting to see the Packers +100 on the money line, Mike. Would you chance it?
I love Minnesota. I love the way they're playing. Kirk Cousins was harassed last week against the 49ers. I think he was at his A game. He's been playing well despite Minnesota's troubles. They have trouble running the ball. I'm going with Minnesota. They're on a roll. Green Bay's really struggling, losing.
Are they really on a roll? It's like, they've played a lot of games this season. They've lost close games. They looked good last week, but they were so erratic before that.
Listen, the 1-score game was with them last year. It hasn't been with them this year, but pulling out that big win against San Francisco was huge. A couple of close games ago, the Chicago win the game, come home, win that game. They looked really good against San Francisco.
Winning teams supposed to win close games. They don't choke them away.
I know that, but I don't think Frisco's as good as we thought they were, and the Vikings weren't as bad as we thought they were. And to me, Kirk Cousins has proved he's an A-list quarterback. He's not second to anybody right now.
The Vikings aren't as good as they were last year either, so I guess it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. I just think Kirk Cousins is playing well. If the quarterback's playing well, you have a good chance to win. To me, Jordan Love's not playing well.
Yeah, Cousins is playing well because he's got a big payday ahead of him.
Listen, he's getting it done. That's all that matters. I like Minnesota in this game.
Okay, yeah, you betcha.
You betcha. Let's go to the Steelers, who had a big win against the Rams in L.A., playing on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jags -2.5. In the Steel City, the over and under 41 here.
Under gray flannel skies in Pittsburgh.
The Jaguars weren't around when John Facenda, the voice of NFL Films, was doing it. So
true, but when you think of the Steelers, you think of John Facenda.
Yeah, Jacksonville won 4 in a row.
Yeah, well, for those of you younger listening, you don't know who John Facenda is. He's the original voice of NFL Films. But Jacksonville's put it together recently. Trevor Lawrence is a must start. The Pittsburgh defense is not what it used to be. I think you get a bounce back game from Calvin Ridley, who's really disappointed fantasy players recently. He has 100+ receiving yards in 2 of his last 3 road games. Maybe a bounce back spot for Evan Engram, who's kind of been mediocre. Christian Kirk has been playing really well. Travis Etienne is a must start. For the Steelers, George Pickens is very underrated. You roll him out. Najee Harris finally scored his first touchdown last week. I don't start him unless I have to. I'd rather start Jaylen Warren. The Jaguars are favored by 2.5. the Steelers have had a winning record. I have so much respect for Mike Tomlin because, just every year he seems to have his team in position to win. The Steelers are plus 120 on the money line, but I don't think I'd be chancing it, Mike.
No, I mean, this one could go either way. I just like, Jacksonville's offense. I'm not sold on Kenny Pickett. Watt seems to, score as much as Pickett's able to get the ball in the end zone. The over and under interests me. I'll go with an over 41 on this one.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of easy over because, like I said, the Pittsburgh defense is not what it used to be. DraftKings Sportsbook over 41 minus 110. I'm good with that.
All right, let's move to the Meadowlands or MetLife Stadium, where the 2-5 New York Giants are taking on my 3-3 1985 Bears defense, New York Jets. The Jets given 2.5. The over and under 36.5. In this game, the Jets are on a roll. Delvin Cook saying he wants out of town right now. And the Giants, Tyrod Taylor's playing better than Daniel Jones. They could have saved that money, all that money they gave Daniel Jones, just giving it to Tyrod Taylor.
Last time they bragged about the Jets defense like that, I think they gave up like a lot of points. But it is one of the better defenses in the NFL. But it ain't no 85 Bears or Legion of Boom. I'll tell you that. They got a lot more to prove before we talk about them
more.
like that.
You got to win at least one Super Bowl to talk about them like that.
Or even get to that. We know the Jets are jinx. I said this last week. Joe said to the devil, he said, look, you let me win this one, all right? We never have to get one for the franchise again. And it's stuck. This is right, Mike. This is the football version of the Subway Series, except you can't take the subway to get to the game. You have to take the New Jersey Transit train, right?
Which is a nightmare too. It takes forever to do that. So I advise anybody taking the train, do not take the train to the Meadowlands.
Actually, it's the easiest way to get there from Manhattan.
Well, do like I do. I leave at halftime and I'm home for the start of the 4:00 games.
Well, there you go. Anyway, and this is a rare occurrence for you because the Jets are actually the better of the two teams. And I think there's a lot of fantasy goodness. The Giants rank second in fantasy points allowed, fantasy rushing yards, overall rushing yards allowed to opposing running backs. So this is going to be a great game for Breece Hall. The Giants, I believe, are 25th in fantasy points per game allowed to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. Garrett Wilson coming off of his best game this year. 8 catches,
Scott,
12 yards.
The Giants are averaging 12.1 points a game.
Okay, but I got to go into the Jets first.
All right,
the good fantasy plays. Garrett Wilson, 8 catches on 12 targets for 90 yards in the last game before week 6. Good matchup against that Giants defense. So I like those two principal Jets players. I'm also keeping an eye on Tyler Conklin as a deep tight end. He's got 55 plus receiving yards in his last 2 games. Check out the props for Tyler Conklin. That's going to be interesting this week. On the Giants side, the Jets have both of their starting corners back this week. So I will be fading the Giants wide receivers, but I am all about Jalen Hyatt in the weeks ahead. 2 catches for 75 yards last week. Scouting comparisons to Deshaun Jackson. I really like this kid. You can't sit Saquon Barkley. And the Jets actually give up the most fantasy points per game to tight end. So Darren Waller is a pretty good start as well. The Jets favored by -2.5. I think that spread is too small, actually.
No, I love the Jets in this game, and the over and under 36.5. I wouldn't touch that. I'm not sold yet on Zach Wilson getting the ball in the end zone. I just think the Jets are starting to get their mojo, particularly on defense. And this is the case where you could see a 19-10 game or a 19-14, something like that. Low scoring game. And I really love Conklin too, as well. It seems that Wilson has a good rapport with him right now. And there's nothing better for to make a great quarterback than a great tight end. You look at the great quarterbacks throughout the history of the NFL and you say, who was a tight end? Tight ends really make quarterbacks pump up their numbers and make them better.
Well, I wouldn't say he's a great tight end, but he's playing pretty good. He's not Kyle Brady, but he's not Jerome Barker either.
Breakout Mickey Shula.
And those are some very older era tight ends for somebody who just doesn't know. You have to go back in the Jets history book. Who would be the best tight end in the Jets history?
Mickey Shula.
It's not
Mickey
the
Shula.
good.
Now he had some strong numbers.
He was decent.
He was
This
decent,
was a
but they
1980s Jet for
this was a
those of you
night.
who
Yeah.
know.
So we digress. Listen, Mark Bavaro, best New York football tight end of all time by far.
Best I've ever seen when I've traveled to New Jersey.
There you go. Moving along, let's skedaddle. The Rams, tough loss last week, huh? They take on the Cowboys. Rams getting 6 points. Over and under 45.5.
The spread might be a little large, but
Little
I'm expecting,
bit.
yeah, but this Dallas defense is still tough. Darrell Henderson expressed the hell out of me last week, coming off the street, rushing for 61 yards and a touchdown. But this Dallas defense, 6th in fantasy points per game allowed, 5th actually to opposing running backs. Maybe Henderson get a touchdown finishing off a drive, but I include him in my bust column this week on thegameday.com in the fantasy section because, we could be looking at like 40 yards and a touchdown. A tough matchup. You don't sit Cooper Kupp. You don't sit Puka Nacua. You temper expectations a little bit. I'd be fading Stafford fantasy-wise. Dallas plays offensively better at home. Dak Prescott is a decent back-end QB1. Tony Pollard should have a good game in this matchup. CeeDee Lamb is somebody you don't bench, but the interesting guy that I have a gut feeling about, and I talk about my gut feelings sometimes, they're considerable and they work out. Last week I mentioned Jake Bobo of the Seahawks, and he had 61 yards and a touchdown. I have a gut feeling about Brandon Cooks, who had his first touchdown pass with the Cowboys before the bye, and the opportunity is still there for him to be the consistent wide receiver too that the Cowboys need, and they might have spent a lot of time during the bye week working him in. So Cooks in the deeper league, somebody to consider, and check out the props for him as well.
To me, this is an important game for both teams. A chance with San Francisco losing 2 in a row for the Rams to kind of try to challenge for that NFC West title, and the Cowboys too for that number 2 seed spot.
The Rams are not
NFC.
challenging for the division title.
Well, the appearance, if they get their 4th win, they're 1 win behind San Francisco, depending on what happens with the 49ers. So, I mean, you mean to tell me
go to 5-2 this week, hopefully too.
Okay. And, I was kind of surprised by this stat on defense with the Cowboys. Micah Parsons just had his 5th sack of the season. Kind of surprising with that.
And it being good or bad?
Kind of not. I thought he'd have more than that at this time of the year.
Yeah.
He's kind of slowed down.
He had a bad game against San Francisco.
Well, he's not Lawrence Taylor, that's for sure, right?
No. But, he's not Kayvon Thibodeau either, but we don't want to piss off Carl Banks, so let's move on.
Well, yeah, we don't want to upset Carl Banks.
No.
The Seahawks, they are hosting the Cleveland Browns, but a lot going on in Cleveland. Cleveland get 3.5, over and under 38. They were given a gift last week with that win against the Colts, number 1. All kinds of stuff going on at quarterback. Deshaun Watson being called out about his shoulder injury. Basically saying he's breaking his ass to get back in the lineup because a lot of people have been questioning his desire to get back in there. Otherwise, it's going to be PJ Walker taking the snaps from under center.
Yeah, Brady Quinn got into it with Watson's quarterback coach on social media about what you were saying. That was interesting. But this is a defensive game. I'm leaning towards the under. The Seattle defense has only allowed 30 points in its last 3 games. And they also have 18 sacks over that span. So they're a good defensive stream. I know they lost to Uchenna Nwosu, but, they'll still get a pass rush. They did sign Frank Clark, the former Seahawk. This defense is looking really good right now. They have the best trio of cornerbacks in the NFL. Like the Jets probably have the best 2. When you look at the Seahawks, 3 of Reek Woolen, Trey Brown, and rookie Devin Witherspoon, who's playing spectacular. Plus Jamal Adams is healthy, and Julian Love, really good safety combination. This is a tough secondary to crack for Amari Cooper, who I think you should fade in fantasy football this week if you can, especially with PJ Walker at quarterback as well. Tough matchup for Kareem Hunt and Pierre Strong at running back, as Jerome Ford is out with an ankle injury. The Seahawks are 1st in fantasy points per game allowed to running backs, playing great defense. On the offensive side, as we record this, Kenneth Walker questionable with a Kenneth Walker has been questionable with a calf injury. Maybe Zach Charbonnet starts, but this is a tough matchup on the other side. Like Cleveland's defense usually doesn't get blown up like that. The Seahawks offense has sputtered in the red zone the last few weeks. DK Metcalf's not an ideal start. Tyler Lockett, not an ideal start, dealing with a hamstring injury. This is a game where I start the Seahawks defense and whoever's starting at running back for the Seahawks, but and I'm certainly taking the Seahawks to cover the spread. But other than that, I think I'm out on this game.
Cleveland, we talked about them being that's one of those teams that's kind of the tier 2 team. They were given a
Maybe
win
tier
last
3.
They were given a win last week by the referees, but you got to give credit to defensive end Myles Garrett. I mean, he's been phenomenal,
He's been terrific.
And Gino's got to watch out for him. He's been unbelievable.
Yeah, it's more the thing like Gino's play has been inconsistent, and he finally tightened things up on third down. But when they get in the red zone, he hasn't been able to punch the team in. That's the problem. And against a good Cleveland defense, it could continue to be a problem. But the offensive line, they've also been dealing with a lot of injuries. That's part of it too.
Moving along, Carolina hosting the Houston Texans. Houston getting 3.5. Over and under 43.5. Why would anybody watch this game?
Because they're a fantasy player or a bettor, and that's why it's on our rundown. This is a week to go with CJ Stroud, who's a top 12 fantasy quarterback in my lineup ranks on rotoballer.com. Nico Collins is a must start. He's got 80 receiving yards in each of his last 2 games. Tank Dell comes back from a concussion. He should have a good game. Watch this backfield because Devin Singletary with 58 yards on 12 carries in the last game might start taking over for Dameon Pierce, and the Panthers are very bad against the run. On the other side, you go with Adam Thielen, and really not a whole lot else. We have to see what happens in that backfield between Miles Sanders and one of your favorite names, Chuba Hubbard.
Carolina's given up 42 points in the last 2 games. I don't see a lot of positives here, and like I said, from a national perspective, not a lot of interest here.
Houston's getting better. They're starting to be a fun team to watch. The arrows pointing up for the Houston Texans, so there's a lot to like. I think they're also a sneaky good defensive play this week in fantasy.
Well, speaking of sneaky good, where can the listeners follow you again on social media and X, not formerly known as Twitter?
Yeah, at Scotty the King on X, and also thegameday.com, rotoballer.com, Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio Saturdays 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, not AM, and also Seahawks.com on the Fantasy Insiders tab.
He is the King, Scott Engel. I'm Mike Damergis. That's a recap of our Week 8 number previews in the NFL.